I live in a place called New Eton in England that has a lot of old history going back hundreds of years. It's also where George Eliot, the writer, was brought up. Well, because it is old, people around here say that there are quite a few haunted places to go to, including Arbury Hall, where she was brought up, and another place nearby called Adsley Castle that is supposed to be haunted by the young lady Jane Grey. You know, the one that was queen for only 11 days, and then got beheaded by the King of England. Well, anyway, here's my story. It must have been about 2.5 years ago now, when me and my friend couldn't get to sleep late at night, so we thought about having a late night jog into the country, towards the ruins of Adsley Castle. As we started jogging towards Adsley Castle, at about 1:30 in the morning, I started to feel somewhat scared at the thought of going towards the macabre ruins. Even in daylight hours, it looks eerie and oppressive, and with the 600-year-old church next to it, can you blame me for feeling nervous at the time? So, as we were jogging down these narrow country roads, I was starting to think back to the other times when I've been to the castle in the daytime, and the overpowering sadness of the place, and the cold spots too. Should I go back? I thought. But no, me and my buddy carried on towards the lake nearby, and then towards the old run-down empty village. We started to hear a faint hard tapping sound, like metal hitting metal, coming from somewhere in the village, or the church near the castle. Now, due to the situation, we started to feel somewhat scared and apprehensive about approaching anywhere near the village, let alone the castle, so we walked towards the phone box nearby and played around on the phone for a while until we felt more confident. Now, you must remember that this place is in the middle of the country and there is nobody that lives nearby. It was just me and my friend in the greenery of the fields, the darkness of the woods, and the closeness of the ruined castle, church, and village. Anyway, there we were, having a bit of fun on the phone, when all of a sudden, we felt as if somebody was watching us. At the same time, it got very cold in the phone booth. Me and my friend Simon looked out of the plain glass booth all around us, but could see nothing at all, but the feeling was still there. But me and my friend just laughed it off and said it was all in our minds. So we started to play around on the phone again, until all of a sudden, we heard footsteps walking towards us, getting louder, as if somebody was wearing heavy leather boots, but nobody was there. The footsteps got louder and louder, until they went past the phone booth and on, until they stopped. Now, we were absolutely petrified and scared beyond belief. There was still nobody there. Now the footsteps were coming back again, and doing the same thing all over again. Plus, the sound of the footsteps was getting louder, no doubt about it. By the time we had the courage to run out of the booth and sprint all the way back home, it must have gone past us at least 4 times, and it was getting much louder too. However, just before the last time we heard the stomping, I could have sworn from the distance I saw a man in shining armor, but he looked very transparent and blurry, like it seemed like this person was slowly fading away, but you could see him just enough to make out it was a person, almost like a failing projector. It didn't last very long, and I asked my friend if he saw it, but he said no. This story is all true, and I can still remember every detail of that night, like it was only yesterday. When I was between 3 and 4 years old, I shared a home with my mom and dad. There were many nights where I would wake up screaming until my mom or dad would come into my room to calm me down. They were sure that it was my Spider-Man poster on the wall across from my bed that scared me. Maybe they were right. However, one night I will never forget. I was put to bed on the bottom bunk of my bunk bed. It was a hot night, so I leaned up against the wall for comfort because it was cool to the touch. As I was going to sleep, I slid my right hand and arm down between the wall and bed in order to get even closer to the wall. No sooner was my arm and hand dangling beneath the bed than something grabbed it and pulled very hard. I leapt up, freeing my hand and screaming bloody murder. My dad came into the room and eventually calmed me, convincing me that I'd imagined it all. Nothing else occurred that night. And the next day, when I persisted, my dad said it must have been a cat or a bug hitting my hand. I assure you, I knew the difference, even then. Nothing else occurred in this house to me that I can recall. Years later, I was asking my mom about it to see if she recalled the incident. She did, and told me something she never had. She said one night, late, she had gotten up to go to the bathroom. She was pregnant with my sister, and having to go several times each night. She walked through the dining room in the darkness towards the bathroom. She said she saw something whitish and misty hovering over the dining room table. She immediately turned and hurried back to bed, scared to death, with the hair on her neck standing straight up. Years later, my friend Kevin was visiting here where I live now, and he brought this new guy along that I'd recently met. We hung out, and later that evening, we went to take him home. To my surprise, he lived in the same house that I used to, where all the strange things had happened. When we pulled into the drive, I asked him if there was anything weird that ever happened there, not telling him that I once lived there and what had happened. He asked me why I wanted to know that, and I told him that I used to live there and thought something strange had happened once. He then bluntly tells me that the house has a ghost and how it opens their back door at night after they shut and locked it. I then shared my tale and was very happy because then I didn't feel so crazy. This was my first encounter with the paranormal, but not the last, and certainly not the most frightening. I'll try to send those later, if you'd like. When I was a young kid, around about the age of 8, me and my family decided to go on holiday to a place called Matlock for 2 weeks. We arrived at this old farmhouse that was built in about the 17th century and looking the worse for wear. Anyway, on about the second night we were there, we started to hear scratching sounds and furniture moving downstairs, but we just ignored it at first and tried to go to sleep. But on the third night, we couldn't ignore it because the floorboards upstairs started to vibrate and the whole farmhouse was literally shaking. It was more worse for me and my brother because we had to sleep on the floor and we could hear strange mumbling sounds coming from downstairs, and the horse in the field next to the farmhouse was making really weird sounds too. The next morning, my dad put it down to bad plumbing, even though my brother and me were getting nervous. Halfway through the day, I was starting to get bored, so I decided to read a few books from the bookcase in the living room. So I sat down at the table next to the bookcase that faced a window and started reading for a while. I remember at the time reading a book called The Iron Man. All of a sudden, I can remember seeing something standing in front of the window. So I looked up suddenly, and right in front of me was a young pale-looking lady smiling at me. She was wearing white Victorian clothes and a straw-looking hat with flowers in it. I remember sitting there, just looking at this lady for what seemed like ages, even though it must have been only a few seconds. So, thinking it was somebody from my mom or dad, I shouted for them to come downstairs. As I turned to confront my dad to tell him this lady wanted him, she had vanished. So my dad went outside and looked all around the field and at the end of the field towards the bog area, but there was no sign of her, even though we were in the middle of nowhere. Now, I think my dad was starting to get quite spooked as well, because now he kept asking me over and over again, and that I wasn't lying about the woman I had seen. I remember on the fourth and last night, hearing all sorts of weird and distorted sounds coming from everywhere around the room where we were sleeping, next to my mother and father's bed. I can also remember my dad kept telling me it was a nearby highway that was causing the vibrations to the house, and there was nothing to be scared about. Funny, considering the nearest highway was about 10 miles away. When we woke up the next morning, my dad was starting to pack all our stuff away, ready for going back home. When I asked him why we were going back home so early, he just said that it was because he thought the place was haunted, and he wasn't going to spend another night there. When I talk to my dad these days about that holiday, and about him leaving early because it was haunted, he just laughs and says don't be stupid. But me and my brother know the truth. This is just one of the many weird experiences that have happened to me over the years, and I'll be posting some very more soon to this great website. Thank you. I grew up in a very old house in Mason, Michigan. From the time I could remember on, weird things would happen there. I used to hear footsteps all the time. If I was downstairs, I would hear footsteps upstairs. I always slept upstairs in one of the two rooms. When I slept in the small bedroom, I would hear what sounded like phonographic music, laughter, and glasses breaking. My wind-up music boxes would play by themselves, and I often heard a low male voice say my name. Mine and my parents' pillows would sometimes breathe. Downstairs, we had a sliding glass door leading into a back room, and my parents, visitors, and myself would see a silhouette of a tall man bent over working or walking around. It got so aggravating that we put a curtain up so we wouldn't see it every time we walked by. Sometimes, when we opened the curtain, we would see his face pressed up against the glass. We found out through research that a family had lived there, and the man, John P., had his blacksmith shop at the house. We believe that was the room where he was found dead there by a troop of Boy Scouts. His wife Ida was a socialite and died a very long death upstairs. There was also a woman named Tessa Ann that lived there during that time, and we do not know what happened to her, but we know she had a son named Donald. When my son was a baby, I would often hear a woman's voice in his room talking to him softly, and he would be staring up like there was someone else. One time, I'd come out of the bathroom, upstairs, and saw a woman in a long black dress with sandy brown hair standing in the doorway to the big bedroom. Ida? I saw her and tried to go the other way, but instead, I walked towards her and put my hand out, and she disappeared. It was like I was in a trance or something. Our friends and myself were always nervous about going upstairs for anything, and one time, when my son was very small, I was at the top of the stairs and felt a push. I don't remember the fall, but when I opened my eyes, I was on my back, headfirst down the stairs, and had the baby in my arms still. I have to wonder if something didn't push me and something else flipped me around to save my baby. May have been a reflex. I really don't know. I would have an ashtray in my bedroom and would often go in there to find cigarette butts lined up in a neat row on the bed when no one was even there to do it. My friends would leave their keys on the table, and they wouldn't be there when they go to leave. We'd search the house, and later find them where they had been left, even though we already looked there. I had several occurrences of someone knocking on my door, and as I didn't have a knob or anything on it, it would swing open. I'd hear a couple soft knocks. It would open a little, and I'd close it. Then, as soon as I'd lay it back down, I'd hear louder knocks, and it would swing open farther, and this would progress until the door would slam open and hit the wall. We had a lot more than that happen there, but I don't want to get into everything because that would take too long. We did notice that things would get really bad when there was tension between my mother and myself. However, when everything was calmed down, then all was okay. Weird things happen to us everywhere we go, even though we live apart now, and I have to wonder if we don't just attract that sort of thing, give it energy, or something. But I've never had any weirder stuff happen than what happened in the Mason house. I've been raised with the belief that's supernatural. My family has had a long line of being able to see and hear ghosts, and I never really believed I had the ability until I was 10 years old. My mother and we had went down to Kentucky to visit some family that lives there. My mother is from there. We had spent most of the night talking, and finally went to bed. Nothing happened throughout the night, but when I woke up in the morning, I saw a sight that I couldn't believe. I want to believe that this was only sleep paralysis, but I truly feel as though this was a ghost. I woke up and rolled over on my back with my eyes still closed. When I opened my eyes, I saw an elderly woman floating above me. She was wearing a white dress and had long flowing hair. I remember she was smiling at me. Well, being 10 years old, I was terrified, so I screamed for my mother. I told her about the woman that floated through the wall and then disappeared. My mother came in the room and felt the cold, but missed a woman. From this point on in my life, I felt and seen ghosts. I'm guessing that this woman was my great-grandmother. The only reason I believe that it is her is because I am named after her, and my mother said that when I was a toddler, I would talk to her. Now, I know this sounds hard to believe, but my mother said that I would say these things that only her and my great-grandmother knew, so I have no choice but to believe this. Thanks for reading, and if this doesn't give you nightmares, I don't know what will. I've been living with a spirit for just over 2 years. I'm an assistant superintendent on a part-time basis, an executive assistant for a recycle company, also a mother and wife. I guess I'm just telling you this so that you know that I'm not someone who has nothing better to do with my time. It all started when a 7th floor resident, who I'll call Bobby, jumped off his balcony and killed himself just over 2 years ago. My sister and I, who also worked here, had to clean up the mess, later finding out that this is supposed to be done by the fire department. His family left a lot of furniture in his apartment. Usually, we give the leftover stuff to the Salvation Army or to a needy tenant. In this case, my sister had just gotten separated from her husband and was in need of a bed. You might think this is kind of morbid. I know I do. She took the bed from the former tenant's apartment for herself to use. In the months that followed, a lot of strange things happened at her place and mine. She lived just down the hall from me. Doors would open and close for no apparent reason. Lights would go on and off. The toilet would flush. I would wake up in the morning to find the kitchen cabinet doors open, and on 2 occasions, the shower turned on. So it sounded like your basic haunting. Last November, my sister moved back to her home country, 3,000 miles over the ocean. A few weeks before she moved, things got worse. Not in the sense that it was dangerous, just that it happened more often. One night, I was down at our apartment with my 2-year-old son. My son was standing in the doorway that led to the living room. He was looking down the hall, as if watching someone walk towards him. It was like he turned around when the person walked past him looking up, suggesting it was an adult. We made a joke of it. I told my son to say hi to the nice man. He turned around and looked in the corner right by the front door and say in his little voice, "Hi." This really freaked me out, so I left. Later that night, I went back without my son. My 8-year-old niece was just leaving to go to her friend's apartment down the hall. As she left, I called out to her to close the door. She did not hear me, and the door stayed open a couple of inches. I was sitting on the couch doing a crossword puzzle, and decided to finish my puzzle before going to close the door. 10 minutes later, my sister was in her room, getting dressed. She was in the shower. She called me to go and talk to her while she did her hair. I walked to the front door to close it, but it was already closed. This is not unusual. Sometimes this happens. But what I cannot explain is the door was also locked. There is no explanation for this. My sister was in the shower. My niece did not hear me to call her, nor does she have a key or the knowledge to lock the door. It really spooked me. I told my sister, and she also got spooked. She told me she had been hearing noises that did not seem to be coming from anywhere. My sister and I chatted for a couple of hours until my niece came home. I asked her if she locked the door, and she looked at me and said, "Yeah, sure," with my finger, being 8 with a smart mouth. I left about an hour later to go home. At this time, it was approximately 10 p.m. My niece was sleeping on the couch, and my sister was going to finish some painting in the dining area, then go to bed. I'd been home for about 20 minutes when my sister calls me crying. She said that there was someone in her bedroom jumping on the bed. I told her to go and look. She took the phone with her and approached her bedroom. The noise stopped just as she got to the bathroom. When she turned to walk away, the noise started again. She put the phone on speaker so I could hear too. It really sounded like someone jumping on the bed. My sister, trying to make a joke of it, yelled, "Go away, Bobby. Go and spook someone else." 2 minutes later, I heard a noise in my hallway. I was sitting at my computer and looked down the hallway towards the kitchen, and there was Bobby standing just inside my front door. He had on a brown leather jacket and blue jeans, the clothes he was wearing when he died. I was really shocked. I told my sister what I saw and tried to pretend that I was not scared. I said to him, "It's okay, Bobby. You can go now." And then he was gone. My sister was laughing hysterically on the other end of the phone. I tried to calm her down by talking to her, but it did not work. I was kind of glad that she was freaking out, because it did not give me time to freak out myself. I went to my sister and sat with her until the sun came up. Neither of us slept that night. Later that day, we took the bed out to the dumpster at the back of the building, and since my sister only had a few days left in Canada, she slept on an air mattress. That seemed to solve the problem for her, but Bobby has never left my apartment. I do not feel threatened by this presence, but uncomfortable. And my cat is constantly having freak attacks, and my son talks of the man. The stories I'm about to tell you actually happened to a cousin of mine at his college campus. One night, this one guy was lounging around in his dorm while his roommates were out. He was relaxing and reading on his bottom bunk bed when he heard scratchy noises in his room. Wondering what it was, he looked around and didn't see anything unusual. He went on reading again. A few minutes later, the sound started coming around again, just a bit louder. He proceeded to look out his window, where he noticed tree branches hitting the windowsill. Thinking this was it, he went back on reading. The noises stopped just for a few seconds. Then, all of a sudden, the noise came back, and this time, it sounded very close by. He checked out the top bunk and saw a ghostly image of a lady in very antique-looking clothes ran out of his dorm and never came back to live there since. One night, some student decided to have a party on campus. A group of students were on their way to a party when they ran into this girl. She looked like a regular student there, but nobody had seen her before. Anyways, the group tried to get her attention to ask her to the party, but she didn't seem to hear them. They called to her again, but she just kept right on walking. So one of the guys decided to walk up to her. The rest of the group had gone into the building. As she approached the girl, he noticed she was smiling at him. He looked down and saw her face was facing him, but the rest of her body faced the other direction. He screamed and ran back to his friends. The group ran back out and tried to look for the girl, but she was nowhere to be found. When I was little, I used to be able to see spirits. I was never scared of them though. I remember one spirit in particular. Her name was Mimi. Mimi always showed up at nighttime when I was supposed to be asleep. I had a habit of very bad nightmares of people dying, especially my parents. One night, I woke up sweating and in tears when I thought I saw someone standing in my doorway. At first I just saw a mist. That then turned into an old lady. I was able to see through her. At the moment I didn't realize it, but it was Mimi who came back to check up on me, and she had her little dog with her. I watched as she came near my bed. When she was standing right next to me, petting her dog, I felt calmness come over me, and I felt so safe with her there. As she sat down on the corner of my bed, she told me not to fear, that my parents were sound asleep, safe, and sound in their bed. I remember how I still couldn't calm down right away. I was still crying when she put her dog up on my bed with me. At the time, I used to call the dog Pinky, since you could see the pink of her skin under her white fur. I watched Mimi as she went into the hallway and then faded away. I heard from Mimi almost every single night since then, until my 10th or 11th birthday. I'd been playing games with my cousins when we decided to have a race to see who would get outside the fastest. They let me have a head start since it was my birthday. As I headed up the stairs, I heard them right behind me. All the grown-ups were right outside at the time. I ran through the kitchen and went to hit the door handle to go outside, but I missed it. Instead of opening the door, I went through the glass back door. Glass was everywhere. I had cuts all over the place and was bleeding. I ended up passing out, but before I even lost consciousness, I thought I saw a figure of Mimi. It was weird, but then I passed out. Then, when I regained consciousness, I was sitting in a hospital bed, and my family and friends were all around me. They were so concerned, and I was just wondering about what happened to Mimi. I screamed out Mimi, and they were so confused, like they didn't know what I was talking about. I tried to tell them in detail, but they just waved me off and dismissed me like it was stupid or something. They told me ghosts definitely don't exist, and that I was just seeing things because of my injury, but I had told them about the bed incident of me being in my room, and they still waved me off, like I was nuts. So that's where the story ends. Nothing really came of it, and after that, I never saw Mimi again. I honestly don't know what she represents. Maybe she's a guardian angel. Maybe she appeared in my dreams and I was just imagining it all. Whatever it was definitely a special incident, and I'll never ever forget it. Hey Phantoms, it's Phantom of Darkness here, and I'm glad that you enjoyed this video. And I can't talk as usual, but I want you to share this video all around social media. It really helps, and if it can talk like this, then I can talk like me, and I can actually not make any sense, and then I can just leave this outro as it is, because it needs to be authentic. And there's so much background noise right now. The lawnmower guy was just done, trying to wreak havoc on the lawn, and the world is just in shambles right now. So let's just get our pitchforks ready and go at the lawnmower guy, because he is keeping us from recording great stories. Anyway guys, no, just leave him alone. He's a nice guy. He's just trying to do his job. Everybody in the comment section, wave a salute to the lawnmower guy. And I guess I'll just end the video like that for some reason. Anyway guys, love you. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe if you're new. Although, after hearing this outro, that's probably the last thing you want to do. But I'm telling you, it'd probably be good for your health. Oh, actually, I don't know. I'm just being a narcissist. Okay, bye guys. Love ya.